What's up, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, Nvidia, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I'm also going to break down what's going on with the economic calendar as we have the payrolls and unemployment data coming out tomorrow morning. It's going to cause a very, very big move. But just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Webull link. If you deposit any amount of money, you're guaranteed 12 free stocks. If you deposit $500, you're guaranteed 20. And if you deposit $25,000 more, you're guaranteed 75. So our friends very soon in just about 4 weeks from now. Anyways, now let's talk about the markets. So I just wanted to mention that we have a very distributive structure developing on SPY so far, which tends to lean a little bit more bearish because of the fact that we're getting these rejections. But sometimes technicals are not everything as we have big data. So I want to focus more on that before I break down more details about this chart. Yes, SPY had a high here, it came down, made a lower high, came down, made another lower high, rejecting off our 20 EMA before coming down. And the odds do favor this trying to dip a little bit more, but we have to watch for confirmation and some data first to see if to see if that's going to be the case. So let's talk about this data. What data is coming out? Tomorrow is going to be Friday, October 4th, 2024. Please note that 1 hour before the market ends up opening, we have very important data coming out. That's at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's the time in New York for those who are around the world. That's the time that the New York Stock Exchange ends up using. So I want to say that we have unemployment coming out. We're expecting 4.2 or 4.3%. That's the most important piece of data. Now, unemployment could be used for determining if we're getting closer to a recession. It's very important for different indicators like the SAMS rule and many other things like that. Also, what's important is it's going to affect the Fed's policies. The Fed does not want unemployment to spike way too much. And on top of that, it's going to be impacting many different things. So unemployment is going to be very important. We're expecting 4.2 to 4.3%. Then we have a bunch of payrolls. We have the non-farm, governmental, manufacturing, payrolls all coming out, even the private sector is announcing them. That's going to be another big factor. So this is going to be huge for the markets. So the main time for volatility is going to be at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and also market open when we start to see the reaction to all this data that's coming out. Now, for tomorrow specifically, okay, the market has about a 568 max pain so far. This will be adjusted as time goes on. Right now, the majority of positions are in puts, but it's not that big of a ratio. It's only about 2.18. And we also have a very small amount of puts expiring for the next couple of weeks compared to what we've seen during other weeks. So basically, we only have about 230,000 or a little bit under that, 230,000 of these calls expiring. And we have over 480,000 puts expiring. That's why we have this 2.18 ratio. We'll see what this leads to. We do have a max pin that's very close to where we are for now, but we'll see how it's adjusted. The Fed's policies are also going to be adjusted depending on what happens with unemployment. Right now, there's about a 36.7% chance we get a 50 basis point cut, and about a 63.3% chance we get 25 basis points. We'll see what happens. It's also going to be important for the Fed. I also want to mention this news that came out. So right now, there's news coming out about how one of Tesla's top executives is leaving. I wanted to call this out. That's part of why Tesla was dipping alongside the whole market affecting it. So for those who are interested, that's a pretty interesting piece of news. There's also news right over here about what's happening with the strikes around the world. So a very important piece of news is going to affect supply chains. And you can see there's a lot of companies being involved in this. So we're seeing thousands of workers who are going on strike. We're seeing dozens of these ports being closed, and it's affecting our commodities, our products, and our prices right now here in the US. And it's very important for these companies. This has been affecting Apple to some extent, not to mention Samsung. Samsung is one of the biggest companies being impacted by this. IKEA and Walmart. Walmart's a big one. We have other smaller ones such as Goodyear, GM, Amazon, the Home Depot, and a bunch of these are all being impacted by these big pieces of news. So this is going to have a big effect on different products. In my personal opinion, if one can, it's very important to try to store up on certain products such as like toilet paper, paper towels, and stuff like that, just to be safe. But just be careful, guys. There's high demand for them right now, and supply is slowing down. So prices could not only shift, but also, it might be very, very hard to find them. So be careful for those who are out there. And I just wish the best for everyone with their shopping and things like that. There's also been a lot of news about crude oil. This is making big moves as there's been a lot of talk about how Israel may be planning a retaliation against Iran after everything that happened for the past week. So the history of this goes back a long while. I'm not saying it started by anyone or anything like that, but whatever happens is going to be very important. If Israel does end up hitting many of the energy infrastructures of Iran as retaliation, or if something like that were to happen, there's been a lot of talk about that. That could have a big effect on crude across the globe. So US crude oil could jump, and that's going to have a big effect on the markets if we do see something like that happen. So just wanted to call that out. we don't know for sure. Nothing's guaranteed, but we'll just have to wait and see. So, with that being said, guys, there's a lot of factors affecting the markets from supply chains due to what's happening at the ports of the US. Not to mention the whole situation involving Israel, which could affect oil, that could affect us to some extent. And then the unemployment numbers are going to be the biggest factor for sure. So, even if there's no new pieces of news around the world, this is going to be the biggest piece of news for the US market. So, we're guaranteed a big catalyst for tomorrow. And that's why it's going to be the most important thing. The most important thing out of all this is going to be unemployment. If this is high at 4.4% or above, that's going to be a little bit more bearish for the markets. The market may get a more negative response. If it's as expected or below, it could be decent. So we'll just have to see how it reacts. If it's below expectations, which is very unlikely, then that could cause the market to bounce. But we'll see about that. So what do I see for the levels? It's very simple. We're expecting at least a 5-point move on SPY. If we're bearish tomorrow, okay? If we're bearish, we're going to be looking for this thing to lose 565. If 565 fails us, we're dumping down to about 562, in my opinion. 5 points down. 562 would be coming. If we're bullish, you want to see this thing bounce and try to break past just around the 570 area, close to the 20 EMA. If we break that, we're looking for a push all the way up to at least 572 or above towards this upper imbalance. So it could go either way, but from a technical standpoint, we are looking more bearish. Why is that? Because we had this high up here, came down at a lower high, came down at a lower high, and then also we had this interesting tendency to reject off our 20 EMA. The market tried to bounce today after we got the services numbers, and we failed to really hold up. We pumped only to dump back down, which goes to show the market struggled. So in my opinion, anything could happen, right? With data, you never know what's going to happen. I'm obviously not some kind of fortune teller. I don't know what's going to happen with that. But like I said before, the technicals do look a little bit more bearish and they favored the downside. We'll see what happens with the data coming out. So make sure you're open minded for that. For ES, if we're bearish tomorrow, you want to see this thing basically lose 57.25. If that fails us, I think we dump all the way down closer to 5,700 flats. If we're bullish, you want to break past 5760. If that breaks, we're looking for this to get very close to 5800. Look at the double top leg structure and this rejection right here. I think we could be dipping all the way down to about 5700. So I think there's a good chance we start dipping closer to the lower levels on ES. This looks like it has a double top. It looks like it has some imbalances that are dragging it lower. So the odds are favoring the downside. However, I don't know for sure. It depends on the data tomorrow. So we'll see how things end up going. All right. So make sure you watch your levels and we'll see how things go depending on what kind of data we see tomorrow. For other stocks out there like Nvidia, Nvidia is in a very, very interesting phase right now. So it's been attempting to rebound a bit thanks to some good news that was coming out. I do want to mention the fact that it's been getting some very, very good, ratings from these different analysts. That's part of why it got a little rebound and also because of other pieces of news. But the issue is we're at this resistance right now around this 122 area and we haven't been able to like crack through that. So it's very simple. If we're bullish tomorrow, you want to break past and hold above 122, start pushing above 125. For bearish, you want to lose 120, and we're going to be looking for a target back down to about 119 and 117. So, in my opinion, I think that's there's a possible head and shoulders right here, and this could be a start of like a rejection since we had a high here, came down to a lower high. And I also want to call out the fact that we have this imbalance below here. So to me, it looks like we might see a little bit of a dip on Nvidia back down towards the 120 area. It's a stronger possibility, but we'll see just to be safe. I'm going to be very patient with this. So we'll see how the numbers look tomorrow, but it looks like it might see a slight dip. Bitcoin, on the other hand, looks a little bit more bullish. This is looking different from the market. So if Bitcoin loses 60,000, we're looking for a dump all the way down towards 58,700. For bullish, you want to see it break above 61,650. My gut tells me we're turning a little bit more on the PPO right here. We're actually trying to base at 60,000. So that's a nice support. This favors that it wants to get up to about 61,500. Could we see a little bounce and a rejection, or will we start to break through that? It depends. But this looks like it wants to bounce to me from a technical standpoint. So it looks like 61,500 is very probable. For Tesla, we look more bearish, but remember, guys, Tesla is kind of like it's been dipping ever since we got deliveries. If we're bearish on Tesla, we want to see it lose 238. If that fails us, we're going down to 235, then 232 to that gap support. If we're bullish, we want to break past 244. If we break 244, we're looking for 247 and then 250. So Tesla's on a bit of a downtrend after we got some bad news about their executive, and then also the overall market was selling off, which affected Tesla. So this still looks more bearish. It looks like it might be dipping a little bit lower. We will see just to be safe, but technically speaking, we are more bearish. We are still rejecting, so it could continue to fall a little bit more. However, I still believe that before we get the whole robotaxi event, Tesla will see a nice rebound. I think we're getting ready for it. I think that even if we dip a little bit more tomorrow, there could be an attempt to bounce very, very nicely. There should be a bounce coming soon on Tesla as we get closer to next week, so be prepared for that. For NQ, we had a high here, we came down. Lower high came down. Lower high, we started to come down again. So technically speaking, it's a little bit more bearish, but this could shift depending on unemployment. If we're bullish tomorrow, you want to break past 20,100, past these resistance and start pushing up higher. And if we're bearish, you want to see us basically lose this support at 19,800. And then we could be dipping a little bit more towards 19,700. So we have a head and shoulders like structure. We have this rejection that's forming off our EMAs. There's a higher probability that we could be dipping all the way down towards 19,700. So the odds do favor a little bit more downside towards these imbalances. I think that the 19,700s are very, very probable. So I think that NQ does favor downside looking at the head and shoulders like structure and this downtrend that's starting. But I don't know for sure which way we're going to go depending on unemployment. Just know the charts do still look more bearish. Now, the QQQ is trying to hold up as we saw Nvidia and Meta trying to hold up. However, the issue is we still have a head and shoulders. We still have this gap to fill. So one thing that's worth mentioning is that we did reject off our 20 EMA. If we're bearish, you want to see it lose 478. If that fails us, we're going down to 475. If we're bullish, you want to break past 483 to start pushing for 485 to try to fill this imbalance. Technically speaking, it looks more bearish. We rejected, rejected, and rejected. So it favors coming down to at least 478 by tomorrow, if not the gap fill for 475. I don't know for sure if that's what's going to end up happening. It depends on the data and what kind of reaction we get. Don't forget, it's also a Friday, and Fridays are oftentimes full of manipulation. So we'll see, but just know the chart still looks more bearish. For Aapl, we look more bearish because we had a bearish divergence rejection. If we were to break 226.8, I will turn back to bullish. I think we could get closer to 230. And if we end up losing 225, we're looking for a dip back down to about 224 flat, followed by the gap fill all the way down to 222. So watch those supports very, very closely on Aapl. We're just very range bound right now. The whole news involving the ports has affected it quite a bit. So we're just waiting to see how things end up going from here. But just know, technically speaking, it's a little bit more bearish, could be coming down towards 222. Now, Palantir, of all things, had some bullish news that came out. That's very, very good, at least for the share price. It was getting some good exposure in terms of its searches and ratings from analysts. This is why it got a nice little push right here. So we could be trying to approach the 40 area. It looks more bullish to me. I think it's going to be a very, very key psychological area to look for a little bit more upside. And we'll see what kind of reaction we get after that, as it depends a lot on what happens with the news for tomorrow. For Supermicro, we have a little bit of a range right over here. We tried to push only to reject here, so it's trying to push with Nvidia only to reject. If we're bullish, you want to break 43 to start pushing up higher. And if we're bearish, you want to see it basically reject and lose support around 41.5. If 41.5 ends up breaking, I think we could be dipping back down to 40, which is where we have the next imbalance. So in my opinion, it looks a little bit more bearish. I think 41.5 could fail us and 40 could be coming. So watch to see if that ends up being the case. We'll be open-minded nonetheless. For Rivian's on a bit of a downtrend right over here. We're rejecting off these key supports, especially off our 20 EMA. So I think that there's a good chance this may continue to dip lower. So I think what could be happening to Rivian is we try to push higher for 11. We may try to get to the 11s, but then we'll see if we get a rejection to continue this downtrend. So it may pop and drop tomorrow morning. This depends on the data. So if 11 breaks, we have 11.5 as our next target. And then if we're bearish, you want to see us reject off 11 and start dipping lower. My gut's telling me this is going to push for 11 to 11.5 in that range and come back down. So that's the most likely case in my personal opinion for now. For SoFi, this looks a little bit more bullish as it's trying to hold up. So it has a nice inverse head and shoulders here. It's also trying to rebound. If we were to lose 7.8, we could be dipping lower to about 7.6s. If we hold this, we could be pushing for 7.9 and eventually the 8s. My gut tells me it might be pushing closer to 8s, and we'll see what kind of reaction we get. So be very, very patient nonetheless. For the IWM, we're dipping right now, making lower highs. We basically have the support around 215. If 215 fails us, we're going to be dipping all the way down towards 212. And then if we hold 215, we could attempt to rebound. And if we break 218, we turn back up. So far, it looks a little bit more bearish. So if 215 fails us, we could be dipping to fill this gap at 212. So we'll see what ends up happening, at least from here. For others out there, we have AMD. AMD's on a interesting trend. Is range bound right now. We're going to be dipping tomorrow. We could be forming an inverse head and shoulders right here. I could be looking for a dip for about the 160 area. We'll see if we bounce or not. If we hit 160 and bounce, this goes back up to about 168. If we lose 160, we're looking for a dip back down to about 159 and eventually 156. I'll be watching to see which way we go, so be patient. For ARM, We're on a bit of a downtrend here off this bearish divergence, and we could continue to fall. If we break past 140, we're looking for a pushback up to about 143.5. If we reject here, we could be dipping back down towards 135. We will see what happens from here. So there's a risk of us coming down lower to 135. So be very, very patient nonetheless. For Coinbase, we're rejecting as well. We have this nice little rejection phase. We need to break past 170 to turn back up. And if we reject, we could be dipping all the way down towards 158. So 158 and 156 are going to be our targets if we turn more bearish. There's going to be a risk of downside on coin. So watch and see how this ends up reacting. So be very mindful of that. For Amazon, we look a little bit more bearish. If 182 fails us, I think we could be dipping to 180 then 178 where this imbalance is. And to turn back up, you want to break past 186.5. My gut tells me we have like a head and shoulders like structure, and this could be dipping lower. And this imbalance may drag us all the way down towards 178. So I think there's a good chance that's going to happen. For Meta, it's pushing, but there's a bearish divergence forming. But it still looks bullish nonetheless. Technicals do suggest we're looking for 585 and 590 as our targets. But if we were to hypothetically lose 573.8, we're going to be dumping. There's going to be a big rug pull if that loses that support. But nonetheless, it looks more bullish. It looks like it's trying to push higher. We're seeing volume declining, and also there's a slight bearish divergence. But we'll see how things go. It still looks more bullish. Microsoft looks more bearish unless we reclaim 420. If we reclaim 420, we could be popping higher. If we fail, we're looking for 414 and 409 as our targets. My guts tells me that those are very probable targets, and we look more bearish. For Google, we look a little bit more bearish as we're downtrending, so we're looking for basically the 166 area as our main support to watch for. If 166 fails us, we're looking for basically 165. If this holds, we could try to rebound for basically 168. So look for a dip towards 166, and we'll see what happens from here. So be very patient with this, but it still looks like it might dip a little bit. For DJT, we're dipping right here. I think we might be retesting 15.5. We'll see if we bounce or not. So look for some downside as we made a lower high here. Watch 15.5 and see what the reaction will be. For the VIX, we have a gap to fill. So it's very interesting. We have one gap down here. We also have another gap up here. We're going to fill one of these gaps first. If we get a decent unemployment and the market bounces, we could come down to fill this gap below. If we get a not so good unemployment, the market dips, we could be coming up to fill this gap up above on the VIX. So we'll see what ends up happening. We'll be very, very patient nonetheless. For the 10-year treasury yield, we're trying to push. We'll see how unemployment affects us. It might try to push higher, which tends to be a little bit more bearish for the markets. And the dollar remains more bullish, which tends to be bearish as well for the markets. We're at this resistance at 102. Will we see a little rejection right here? Are we about to see the dollar basically do this, where it kind of like comes down like this? Does it end up retracing like this if the market bounces before it continues higher? Or is the dollar about to just continue to break out and not get much of a dip, which could sink the market lower? So we'll just be watching to see how things end up going. It could go either way, but my gut tells me that there might be a little bit more upside potential for the dollar before it comes back down. So it might hit 102.25 or 102.5 first before it ends up coming down. We'll see about that. So my view of the market is the trends look a little bit more bearish. The odds are favoring the downwards pressure that's coming. I think there's a good chance this might be dipping lower. However, I don't know for sure if that's going to happen. Technicals are not sufficient. They're not going to be everything. So that's why you have to be watching the data tomorrow morning. So I'll be back tomorrow to break down what the data is looking like. I thank you all so much for listening. I hope you guys have a great day, night, or evening. And just know that the market's going to be in a very, very critical place. With that being said, I'll see you guys tomorrow before the market opens. Don't forget the data comes out at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Every single time I talk about times on this channel, I'm referring to Eastern Standard Time for those who need clarification. I'm located in the United States, and I trade based off New York time, which is the Eastern Standard Time, and that's what the majority of traders need to like go over and remember, because New York time tends to be very important for other markets when we have our opens, and then for anything I do talk about involving numbers, involving these pieces of data, it's always going to be in Eastern Standard Time, New York time. All right. So with that being said, thank you all so much for listening. I'll see you guys again tomorrow before the market opens. Have a good night and peace out.